A woman named Clara had always been the picture of devotion to her husband, Martin. Their marriage, built on years of love and companionship, seemed unshakable. But Martin, often lost in the demands of work and life, had stopped noticing the small changes in Clara's demeanor, the way she began to dress differently, the late nights, the vague excuses. He trusted her too much to question anything. Clara, on the other hand, felt something slipping away. She had fallen out of love with Martin long before she realized it. The spark that once lit up their relationship had faded, and in its place, an emptiness had settled in. That emptiness led her to Leo, a colleague who had recently joined her at work. He was different, exciting, spontaneous, everything that Martin wasn't anymore. At first, it was innocent enough. Flirtations, stolen glances, and lunch breaks that ran a little too long. But soon, their connection deepened, and one night, it went too far. Clara and Leo's affair continued in secret, as Clara juggled the guilt of betraying her husband with the thrill of newfound passion. She told herself it was just a phase, that it would pass, but it didn't. It only grew stronger. Martin, meanwhile, began to sense a distance between them. The late nights, the cold silences at dinner, the empty bed on his side. He confronted her, but she always had an explanation, a reason why things felt off. He dismissed his instincts, convincing himself he was being paranoid. But as the months passed, the truth became undeniable. Martin found a message on Clara's phone, one that was meant for Leo but accidentally sent to him instead. His heart sank as he read the words, the undeniable proof of his wife's infidelity. The confrontation was brutal. Clara, caught in a lie, tried to explain herself, but the damage was done. Martin was crushed, betrayed in the deepest way. She begged for forgiveness, but it was too late. The trust they once shared had evaporated. In the end, Martin walked away, his heart shattered but resolute. Clara, on the other hand, was left with the man she thought would fix the emptiness in her life, only to realize that the affair had not filled her heart. It had only deepened the void. As time passed, they both had to rebuild their lives. Martin found peace in his solitude, eventually learning to trust again. But Clara was left wondering if she had made the right choice, or the affair had been a desperate attempt to escape the reality she couldn't face. Months passed, and Martin threw himself into his work, focusing on his career and making time for friends he had once neglected. He began to heal, slowly, as the pain of Clara's betrayal softened. He found a quiet strength within himself, rediscovering passions and hobbies he had abandoned for the sake of the marriage. He learned to enjoy his own company, growing into a version of himself that had long been buried beneath the weight of his old life. Clara, however, was trapped in a web of regret and confusion. Her relationship with Leo began to crumble almost as quickly as it had started. The excitement she once felt turned into resentment and disillusionment. Leo, too, had his own demons, unresolved baggage from previous relationships, and a connection that once felt like salvation soon began to feel like another cage. The truth was, the affair had been an escape, not a solution. The more time she spent with Leo, the more she realized that the person she had really been running from was herself. One evening, Clara found herself sitting alone, staring at her phone, considering reaching out to Martin. She thought of the love they had once shared, the late-night talks, the laughter, the quiet moments. She had convinced herself that she could never go back, that too much damage had been done. But now, in the stillness of her solitude, she wondered if there was any chance for redemption. Could she repair the bond they had broken? Could she atone for her betrayal? Without really thinking, she sent Martin a message. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us. I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I wanted you to know." The message sat on his phone for hours before he finally opened it. He read her words, the apology that came too long after the hurt, and for a moment, he felt a surge of emotion. There was a part of him that wanted to forgive her, that missed the woman he had married. But he quickly reminded himself why he had walked away in the first place. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat with the message, letting the emotions flood through him, but not letting them control him. He had worked too hard to rebuild his life, and while he would never forget the love they had once shared, he had moved on. Finally, after a long pause, he sent a brief reply. "I appreciate your apology, but I've moved on. I hope you find what you're looking for. Clara, take care of yourself. Clara stared at the screen for a long time, her heart sinking with each word. She had hoped for more, for some sign that there was still a place for her in his life, but she knew deep down that she had forfeited that right when she chose to betray him. The truth was, she had lost him forever, and so they both moved forward, each learning the difficult lesson that sometimes the past is too broken to repair, and the only choice is to let go and find a new path forward. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's life continued to unravel in ways she hadn't expected. Leo's presence, once a comfort, had become more of a burden. He had changed, too, more distant, more consumed by his own issues. He was no longer the man who had seemed to offer her a fresh start. The affair had been a fleeting escape, and now, trapped in its aftermath, Clara found herself alone again. Only this time, she had no one to blame but herself. She began to face the harsh reality that the affair hadn't healed her. It hadn't fixed anything. In fact, it had only made her feel more lost. She tried to fill the emptiness with work, with social distractions, with anything that might numb the pain, but it never worked. There were quiet moments, late at night, when the silence of her apartment felt suffocating. She thought of Martin, how kind he'd been, how patient, how deeply he had loved her, but she had broken him. One evening, Clara walked into the small cafe where she used to meet Martin for their weekly coffee dates. The place felt foreign now, too many memories attached to it. She stood in line, her thoughts heavy with the burden of regret, when she caught sight of someone at the far corner of the room. It was Martin. He was sitting with a woman, laughing, his face lighting up in a way she hadn't seen in years. The woman wasn't anything like Clara. She was younger, with an easy smile, her eyes full of something Clara had forgotten how to feel: joy. Clara's heart clenched in her chest. She watched him for a moment, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. It hurt more than she had expected, seeing him so happy, so at peace without her. She had imagined that he would be forever stuck in the same pain she was in, that he would wait for her to come back. But here he was, moving forward, and it hit her with brutal clarity. She had lost him. In that moment, Clara understood that Martin had truly moved on, and despite the part of her that still longed for the life they once had, she realized that she, too, had to let go. She turned away, leaving the cafe quietly, her heart both heavy and strangely light. There was no coming back from this, no easy path back to what once was. She had to face the reality that her choices had led her here, to a life she hadn't expected, a life she had never prepared for. Meanwhile, Martin's life continued to bloom in ways he hadn't anticipated. His relationship with the woman at the cafe, Sarah, grew naturally. She was kind, thoughtful, and had her own history of heartache, which allowed her to understand the emotional scars Martin carried. They didn't rush into anything. They simply enjoyed the process of getting to know one another, slowly rebuilding trust and rediscovering joy. While he would never forget Clara, his heart had healed enough to love again. But it was different this time. He wasn't looking for someone to fill a void. He was looking for someone who complemented his life, someone who didn't carry the same kind of betrayal Clara had. As the months turned into a year, both Martin and Clara learned to live with the consequences of their choices. Clara continued to search for meaning, for peace, but she had learned the hard way that healing didn't come from running away from your problems. It came from facing them head-on, and often that meant living with the pain long enough to let it transform you. For Martin, the future felt brighter now. He had learned that sometimes, in order to find what you deserve, you have to let go of the things that weigh you down, even if it means leaving behind what you thought you'd never lose. In the end, both found themselves in different places, both scarred, but both slowly, steadily, learning to live again as the seasons shifted. Clara found herself standing at a crossroads. She had tried to fill the hole in her life with fleeting distractions, but nothing truly healed the deep wound of guilt and regret she carried. After months of inner turmoil, she decided to seek therapy. The decision didn't come easily. She had always prided herself on being self-reliant, on not needing anyone else's help. But there, in the quiet of a counselor's office, she began to understand the patterns that had driven her actions. The fear of facing her own vulnerabilities, the tendency to run away when things got hard. Through the therapy sessions, Clara began to peel back the layers of her past. She confronted the shame of her betrayal, acknowledging that her affair with Leo had been a desperate attempt to escape the uncomfortable truth that she hadn't been happy in her marriage for a long time. It wasn't about Leo, it was about her. She had chosen to hurt the one person who had loved her unconditionally because it was easier than confronting her own unhappiness. Slowly, Clara learned the importance of self-forgiveness. It didn't come overnight, and there were many nights when the weight of her actions felt unbearable. But with time, she started to rebuild a sense of self-worth, one step at a time. She began to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it and growing stronger because of it. Martin, on the other hand, had come to terms with the idea that love wasn't a static thing. It evolved. His relationship with Sarah was steady, built on the foundation of trust and shared experiences. They had both experienced heartache in their past. And now, they were building something new, without the pressure of living up to some idealized version of love. It was a love that was grounded in reality, in mutual respect, and in the understanding that both of them had their own emotional baggage. But they didn't let that define them. Instead, they worked together to create a partnership that felt safe and genuine. Martin had learned that forgiveness wasn't just for the person who had hurt you. It was also for yourself. He had forgiven Clara, not for her sake, but for his own peace of mind. It wasn't about excusing what she had done, but about letting go of the anger that had once consumed him. He realized that holding on to that bitterness only kept him tethered to the past, and he didn't want to live like that anymore. In time, both Clara and Martin found the closure they'd been searching for, albeit in very different ways. Clara, though still haunted by the shadows of her past, began to see that she wasn't defined by her mistakes. She was learning how to be kind to herself, to move forward with an open heart, no longer running from the truth. For Martin, the closure came when he fully accepted that his past with Clara had ended, and that it was okay to let go of the person he once loved in order to embrace the person he was becoming. The future he had with Sarah felt like a new beginning, one that didn't carry the weight of betrayal, but instead held the possibility of something real and lasting. One fateful afternoon, as Clara walked through the park, she saw Martin and Sarah sitting together on a bench, laughing as they shared a quiet moment. For a brief second, Clara hesitated. She wanted to approach, to say something, to apologize, to explain, but then she realized that the best thing she could do was to keep walking. She didn't need to fix anything with him. He had moved on, and so had she, with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Clara continued her walk, no longer burdened by the ghosts of the past. She had learned the hard way that sometimes love wasn't enough to keep two people together, but that didn't mean there couldn't be new chapters ahead. Martin looked up and saw Clara walking past him. His eyes met hers for a brief moment. There was no anger, no regret, just quiet understanding. A nod of acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition that their paths had crossed and diverged, and that was okay. The healing wasn't instant. It never was. But in that moment, both of them realized that life had a way of unfolding, of pushing them forward, even when it seemed impossible to move on. And as they both stepped forward into their separate futures, they each found a quiet strength in the fact that they were no longer defined by the pain of the past. They were free,